Welcome to the Tamarack webinar with Chris Thompson, author of the Collaboration Handbook and founder of Civic Collaboration Consultants, LLC. We've invited Chris to join us today to share key ideas profiled in the Collaboration Handbook, which draws upon his experience as the Director of Regional Engagement for the Fund for Our Economic Future, a multi-sector collaboration based in Northeast Ohio that's focused on improved job creation, job preparation, and job access outcomes. My name is Sylvia Chu. I'm the Director of Deepening Community at Tamarack, and I'm delighted to be hosting this afternoon's conversation. For those of you not already familiar with the work of the Fund for Our Economic Future, it is a multi-sector collaboration that since 2004 has raised more than $100 million to invest in improving regional economic competitiveness in Northeast Ohio. To date, the Fund's work has contributed to the retention or creation of more than 18,500 jobs and added $760 million in payroll and attracted a total of $4 billion in capital to Northeast Ohio. Now it is my pleasure to welcome Chris Thompson to today's call. Hey, Chris, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Sylvia, for the opportunity, and thanks to Tamarack for hosting this webinar. Really look forward to talking with you today.
And we're really excited to certainly have you share with us, how some of the key ideas that are in the Collaboration Handbook and how your lived experience with the Fund was instrumental in helping you to kind of profile some of its key ideas. But how about we get started by having you tell us just a bit more about how you came to this work of multi-sector collaboration and what prompted you to actually write the Collaboration Handbook.
Sure, thanks. And for those of you who are able to see, we'll try to use a few slides to help out with this as well. But today I describe myself, when people ask what I do, I say I'm a civic marriage counselor. And that means I help leaders from the public, private, philanthropic, and nonprofit sector to collaborate to achieve change. But when I started in this cross-sector collaboration work, it really was as a storyteller. I'm a journalist by training, 20 plus years as a journalist. And I was hired by the Fund to do communications and collaboration back in 2007. I was the second employee of the Fund at the time. And pretty quickly, I learned that I wasn't needed to talk. My main responsibility was to listen to others in the community, and listening is a critical collaboration skill. And so as I listened, I began to become really a student of collaboration, and thanks to the Tamarack Institute and others, I've learned a lot about collaboration. What I've tried to do is marry my storytelling skills along with those collaboration skills to catalyze change. And early last year, I decided that I wanted to work on collaborations beyond the economic development space. As part of the discussion with the Fund about how to transition into a consulting role with the Fund and do other work outside the Fund, we decided it would be good to capture the know-how of collaboration that our Fund has accumulated since it was formed in 2004, and that was really the genesis of the handbook. We're all told to collaborate more, but rarely are we told how to do that. And so we felt it was important for us to share the how of collaboration with not only our members, but our grantees, our partners, and we've been very encouraged by how well the handbook has been received within our region, but also nationally. So it's been a wonderful experience to kind of share our lessons learned, if you will, on collaboration with a broader audience than really I ever imagined.
One of the things I really loved, Chris, when I first was flipping through the book was you introduced me to a new word, CoBLABoration, and I smiled because, Megan, you said it way better than me. So can you tell us a bit more about what is CoBLABoration and what you would recommend be done to translate it into much more effective collaboration?
I always say that CoBLABoration is a made-up word that I've never had to explain to anyone because we've all experienced it. But I do want to give you a quick backstory on where it came from. About 4 years ago, I introduced myself to the head of the largest school district here in Northeast Ohio, a gentleman named Eric Gordon. And I explained what I did in a couple of minutes, and he looked me in the eye and he said, "Oh, so you manipulate people into CoBLABoration." And those were two new words for me, manipulation and CoBLABoration. I laughed when he told me that, and I acknowledged that I was probably guilty as charged, but I was working on getting better at not doing that. I think the idea of manipulation is at the heart of some of the critiques of collective impact and why Tamarack's efforts to advance collective impact 3.0 is so important. Collective impact shouldn't be just driven by those with power to manipulate others. And CoBLABoration, it says it all. CoBLABoration is what happens when we don't take the time and effort to design an effective collaboration process, and when we try to collaborate without either the capacity or the leadership required. I work with a client who has taken over a pre-existing collaboration which was around for probably a decade, but never got out of the CoBLABoration mode. They simply thought that by organizing themselves and hiring an executive director, everyone else would collaborate with them, and that does not happen. You asked, what do you do if you find yourself stuck in one? Well, I would encourage you first to name the problem. If someone is facilitating or coordinating a collaboration and you feel like they're more interested in assigning blame than in creating change, or they're giving opinions rather than using data to inform decision making, you need to call them on it. And I bet if you checked in with your colleagues in the collaboration, they would probably agree with you. You're probably not the only one who's experiencing CoBLABoration, but we do tend to, not challenge that when it happens. We tend to kind of go along. We've been in so many of them that we know it's kind of the norm, unfortunately. So I go so far as to encourage people to leave the CoBLABoration. Life is too short to spend it in too many Groundhog Day meetings. For those of you familiar with the great Bill Murray movie, who he relived the same day over and over, and many of us find ourselves in CoBLABorations where we do the same meetings over and over again. Life's too short for that. I encourage people to step out, but to walk away from the collaboration while telling folks why you're doing it. And usually you can get out of CoBLABoration by spending a little more time on the design of the collaboration and making sure you've got the right capacity and leadership in place to make sure it succeeds. Oftentimes I find the root cause of CoBLABoration is people simply just haven't taken the time to think about how collaboration works.
Thanks for that great definition. I think for me too, one of the places where I've experienced CoBLABoration showing up is when we've been considering a range of possible ways to take action in a complex issue, and when it's time to actually choose one as the starting point. Sometimes there's some doubt, like we're looking for 100% confirmation that this is the right path over the other. Do you have any tips for when that shows up as the root for why we keep wanting to revisit our decision and to make sure absolutely that it's okay and it's the right path?
Yeah, well, one message that I often deliver folks is be prepared to be wrong, because you will more than likely get it wrong before you get it right. And I think if we design the collaborations to give people the freedom to make mistakes and go back on their work. A colleague in this work, a gentleman named Ed Morrison, had a wonderful observation. He said, there's no highways in this work. What there are footpaths, and like any footpath through the woods, you might find it's a dead end, and then you have to go back along the path until you find a different footpath that'll get you through the woods. So I think if the participants in the collaboration know in advance that you're going on footpaths rather than a very clear road that has been surveyed and paved and is well traveled, people are more willing to take risks with you if you acknowledge the uncertainty up front.
Which I guess is one of those ways in which you build trust, which is that the first box you've flagged under collaboration.
Sorry about that. Yeah, so I think your question was about the 3 preconditions for collaboration that we identified at the fund, and those are compelling cause, galvanizing leadership, and high-performing organizations. And others have similar frameworks, but this is the one that we've developed. There's a huge difference between compelling causes and causes that we all complain about. And if we're honest with ourselves, there's many fewer compelling causes. For example, in our region here in Northeast Ohio, it's not uncommon to hear chambers of commerce and business leaders complain about the inability to access the talent they need for their employment needs that they have. And it's a common complaint, but I observed a few years ago that no one had that problem on their business card. No one was working on it. So I wondered whether it was truly a compelling cause if none of the organizations that were complaining about it were, making it a priority enough to change their resource allocation and hire folks. In contrast, there was a county executive in one of our counties, Summit County here, where the community of Akron is located, a gentleman named Russ Pry, who heard those complaints and was compelled to act. And he encouraged others to act. And so he made workforce a compelling cause in his community. So that is incredibly important. And Russ also provided some great galvanizing leadership, the kind of leadership that holds you together when the going gets tough, because in collaboration, the going will get tough. And, you need to know who will hold you there. We did a lot of work in the entrepreneurship area here through the fund, and there was a gentleman named Jamie Ireland who really everyone knew that no matter how tough things would get, Jamie would always be prepared to call the next meeting, call the question, and push things forward. He never had to worry too much about getting stuck because he was prepared to hold the group together. And if you don't know who those people are on the issue that you're trying to collaborate around, you're probably not going to get very far because you need those kind of folks. But the third element that you need is, let me skip here forward so we save time, the high-performing organizations that do good work, and then you're asking them to collaborate in their good work to bring their work to a higher level. One of the early lessons we learned at the fund was that asking mid-level, mediocre, average organizations to collaborate is a guaranteed way to get a failed collaboration. Collaboration is really tough. Collaboration is not a solution to mediocrity. We collaborate in order to improve outcomes, and you can't do that unless you're dealing with high-performing organizations that constantly ask themselves to what end and have clear and measurable goals and actually measure their progress towards those goals and adapt based on what that measurement tells them. a lot of these ideas are about high performance are embedded in the performance imperatives developed by the Marino Institute, and I think highly valuable and oftentimes missed. I would say a common mistake that I see folks do is they think collaboration is a way to save money or reduce costs. And collaboration, again, is very hard work. And if you don't have high-performing organizations participating in the collaboration, it's not going to be successful.
I think you're dead on. It's really challenging to bring those strong organizations on board, and yet when you do, it's almost like they become a magnet for a real setting of momentum for around the collaboration, for sure.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
One thing, Sylvia, I want to add is, sometimes really strong organizations don't come across as the most collaborative in the room. They sometimes like to be in control, and so that's something you got to be careful about. But if asked to choose between an organization like that or a mediocre organization that's really struggling just to deliver value, I'll take one of those high performers and try to help them learn how to be more collaborative, because I think you can teach that maybe even a little bit easier than you can teach high performance.
Yeah, for sure. So can I ask, let's assume that we've got, the right conditions and we've got a collaboration underway. Your handbook actually identifies 3 elements that you say are central from your experience to ensuring that our collaborations are effective. Can you maybe recap for us what those 3 elements are, and maybe perhaps share, if you can, an example or a story of each one?
Sure. And the first essential element is process, and nobody likes to talk about process at all, because we all want to get things done. We don't want to spend a lot of time going to meetings, filling out forms, doing agendas, those kind of things. But one of the things that the fund learned early on was process matters a ton. Having a transparent, effective process helps build the trust that you need. We talk about the need for a data-driven, inclusive, and iterative process, one that's willing to change. So it needs to be a process, obviously, that people have confidence in. So if you could imagine in the funds world, there's 50 plus funders who put money into a pot and then decide together how to deploy that money. They don't all put the same amount in. Some put in 10 times as much as others. And you could easily imagine a situation where smaller funders think, well, my voice won't be heard. It's only the big folks who will be heard. So they've made a design decision early in the fund that I think is critical to the fund's long-term success. Now, pushing on, almost a decade and a half of great work. And that design choice was what they call one member, one vote. So membership is to receive a voting membership in the fund, you have to commit $100,000 over 3 years. But if you commit millions of dollars, and we've had several funders who've done that over time, in over 3 years, you still only get one vote. So no matter how big you are, it is one member, one vote. And that kind of ethos is embedded in our process, and it helps build the confidence and the trust that's needed. So you need to have that kind of process in order to get through the collaboration cycle, which is something that we've borrowed and adapted from the Tamarack Institute and the Plexus Institute and others about going through this cycle of collaboration that we all go through. You need that kind of decision-making, design, and other factors that help make the process of going through the collaboration cycle worth productive and not getting stuck deeply in that are so common in our collaboration work. One of your colleagues, Liz Weaver, was the first one who introduced me to these traps, and one of the messages she delivered that I repeat often is these traps are not optional. You will experience them. The only question is whether the traps of scarcity or rigidity will trap your collaboration and hold it there for a long time, or can you work your way through those traps fairly well? And if you have a good process, you've got a better chance of getting through those traps. But you also need a ton of donuts if you're going to get through the traps. I refer to donuts as the metaphor for capacity for doing collaboration. I use donuts because collaboration does require a fair amount of meetings. A lot of those meetings are held in the morning. Someone's got to buy the coffee and donuts. And obviously there's a lot more functions that need to be done than just buying the food and scheduling the meeting. Oftentimes these are referred to as backbone functions when we use the collective impact framework. But if you're going to do collaboration well, it requires people to do this work. And again, a common mistake is we just think it's going to happen by magic, or don't worry, so-and-so will take care of it. Well, so-and-so has a full-time job plus already, so how exactly are they going to, quote, take care of it? So I think these collaboration functions become critical to sustaining an effective collaboration. And, you know, I referenced earlier that we had an effort around workforce here in Northeast Ohio. And, you know, we have a lot of different organizations working on workforce in our communities, but not a lot of organizations coordinating all of those efforts. We have community colleges, career centers, things known as workforce development boards, et cetera, but they all have their own little niche in in the workforce system. And until we created this entity called Connexus Neo to provide that capacity, it wasn't there. The last piece is leadership, and people say, hey, wait a minute, you just talked about leadership back in the preconditions, and this is just a reminder of how important leadership is, but it's also a different kind of leadership. Before I was talking about galvanizing leadership, the leadership that kind of holds the group together when the going gets tough. This is leadership that extends beyond, you know, the boundaries of an organization, and I sometimes refer to it as the kind of leadership exhibited by people who can show they care more about others than their own organization. If I could, I'll tell a quick story. Two different collaborations. One was done to catalyze biomedical activity in a community, and the other around education. And I think that the kinds of leaders hired made all the difference in one being a colossal failure and one being a phenomenal success. The biomedical collaboration CEO was a very talented, experienced leader who was accustomed to building large research organizations that controlled things. The collaborators who were part of the collaboration didn't want to be controlled, and that project, you know, all but fell apart within a handful of years. The other one in education hired a school superintendent who was accustomed to being in charge, but he knew he was also wise enough that he knew that he was in no position to tell other superintendents what to do, and he adapted a very collaborative approach, very aware of the priorities and motivations of those he was trying to lead, and he is more than willing to start every meeting off by reminding everyone that he has no authority over anyone in the room. And that's a different kind of leader than we're probably accustomed to, and that's the right kind of leadership to coordinate and drive a collaboration process. If you're we often hire organizational leaders to run collaborations, but it is a rare organizational leader who can adapt to the different environment of collaboration.
I really like how you've teased out the distinctive type of leadership required in a collaborative effort. You know, often we talk about there's the positional leaders and absolutely needing those, but then there are those influential leaders who are, you know, very much the collaborative civic leader that you've identified here, like the fellow from the school board.
Yeah.
I wonder. I mean, it's, you know, and it also brings to mind for me the recognition that hosting and convening meetings is a really important collaborative leadership skill and talent. You know, both in the design, but also in having the kind of personality, credibility, trust that when you invite people, they come, right?
Yes, and that they come knowing that you won't tell them what to do. You know, and that's the challenge, right? In an you know, one of the observations I make is that we are all well trained in organizational structures and organizational culture because we all work for an organization. But when you enter into the civic arena where you're working at a collaborative level, those, you know, rules of interaction and authority and the boundaries and the clear lines of who reports to who are not there. When a CEO runs a meeting, it's a lot different than when you bring in a large number or even a small number of independent players and ask someone to run the meeting. So it's more about facilitation than it is about control. And there's a lot of folks who are asked to facilitate who are better at controlling. And you know, and where sometimes facilitation is seen as, well, nothing gets done. We're just talking. And I think that's one of the great challenges in this work is how do you facilitate in a way that doesn't just result in talk, but results in change. Because facilitation that results in talk, that's CoBLABoration. And again, it's all too common. But so there's two kinds of mistakes I guess we can make. We can hire someone who knows how to facilitate great conversations that don't go anywhere, or we can lean on people who are used to running meetings and telling people what to do. Neither one works very well in a collaborative environment. What does work well is bringing in people who are good at understanding and discerning the priorities and motivations of others and figuring out how do we align those diverse priorities and motivations towards actions that can achieve a shared goal.
That's beautiful. So I'm watching our time, and I have one more question for you, but I see that Megan has put in our chat box, or you can certainly email to Megan as well, megan@tamarackcommunity.ca if you're on your phone. Any questions and or comments that you might have about what you've heard Chris talk about so far? Because once we're done this last question, I want to be able to open up the line and have you, Chris, sort of hear some of the feedback, some of the questions from folks who've joined us this afternoon, and then maybe have some time to respond. So my final question for you is that you do talk a lot about that critical role of collaborative leadership. And you've actually, one of the things I really loved about the Collaboration Handbook was how you began to identify some of those essential skills that you think are necessary for someone to have if they aspire to be a good collaborative civic leader. And so I'm hoping that you can take a couple minutes and just sort of unpack a little bit about each one of those three skills for us.
Sure, and I think I'll do them in a little bit different order than I have on the slide. Because we go back to it all starts with building trust. It's the most important one many others have said it before me, but your collaboration will move at the speed of trust. And the level of trust among independent players inside a community is not fixed. It can be increased or it can be lowered, but we probably don't spend enough time as leaders thinking through how is it that we can build trust, and taking really the time and effort to build trust is essential. And one of the great lessons that we pass along in the handbook comes from colleague Kirsten Toth at the GAR Foundation, who says trust is not built in large group settings, it's built one-on-one. And in the collaboration work, we're always eager to get as many people in the room as we can, but that doesn't work if the people who are in the room don't trust each other. So that process of building trust. A woman who worked on the workforce initiative I referenced earlier, by the name of Sue Lacey, met one-on-one with dozens of different manufacturers to try to make sure she understood their priorities and motivations long before she put forward, what they might work on together. And as I think part of this building of trust process is the second skill of practicing inquiry. I think it was Ben Hecht from Living Cities who once said the three most important words we can say at a civic table are, I don't know. And if we acknowledge we don't have the answers to these adaptive challenges that face, we begin to ask more compelling questions and new compelling questions that will help us think differently. And people trust those, I think, who are willing to acknowledge what they don't know. By acknowledging you don't know, you make yourself a little more vulnerable, and that makes us trust as well. And where this is challenging for leaders on a couple levels. First, as leaders, you're generally told you need to advocate for positions, not inquire, but we need to expect our leaders in these environments to inquire first. And the other is asking questions can be risky business, right? If you ask the wrong question to the wrong person, we've all probably experienced that, where you can get your hand slapped or even worse. And so there's a certain risk you take when you ask people, why is the status quo the way it is? But that's the question that you have to ask. And the compelling question that all leaders need to ask is, why is it that despite our best efforts, are we unsatisfied with the outcomes that are occurring in our community? We're all doing great work, but it's not getting us where we want. Why is that? And that's a risky question to ask. And you have to understand the vagaries and ambiguities of complex context to understand, what some of the answers to those compelling questions should be. Understanding the context of your organization is one thing. Understanding the context of the civic system in which you're working requires a lot of inquiry, a lot of building of trust, and a significant amount of effort to just understand, again, what are the priorities and motivations of others. So with working with colleagues at the Cleveland Leadership Center here in Northeast Ohio and Leadership Akron, we've developed a curriculum around this that gives, leaders an opportunity to practice these skills in a safe place. And to give Tamarack a little bit more of a plug, the Collective Impact 3.0 conference that you're hosting next month in Kitchener, Canada, I look forward to presenting the workshop around these three skills at that at that conference. It's a workshop that we've been able to give at different national conferences and across Ohio, and it's proven itself to be something that leaders value because it challenges them to think differently and then gives them tools they can use to work on those different skills.
Well, I know I'm certainly looking forward to that workshop. And in particular, I think one of the things that really struck me as you were talking about it was how important it is to have safe places to practice. these skills, which are very new, before you feel, you are being called upon to apply them to the work that you're leading.
Yeah.
I think that's really important. So we have a number of questions already starting to bubble in, and I'm going to lead off with the first question that comes from John Lynch out of Cleveland, Ohio. And his question is, how do entities within a collaboration demonstrate they value the leadership, the collaborative civic leadership, beyond the financial contributions that they make?
Well, John is a friend, so that he promised me a softball, so I appreciate it, but I'm not sure how soft that ball was. But I think the way, and this raises an important issue of how do you evaluate and assess the effectiveness of a collaboration? And this is one of the things you can measure, is what is the level of commitment the partners in a collaboration are exhibiting to the collaboration process. And they value the leadership when they show up and when they participate and when they assume some of the responsibility for the work. Particularly in a collaborative environment, leadership is not a one-person role. I try not to use the word leader. I try to talk about it in as an active exercise of leadership. And that can come from all sorts of places, but I think we can, and anyone who's trying to organize a collaboration should find a way to measure the level of engagement of the partners in the collaboration process. Simple measurements like how many meetings do they come to, how responsive are they to requests for volunteers to participate in an event. Those kind of things that get a sense of what is their level of commitment to this. Collaboration is all about shared responsibility, and we can measure shared responsibility, and effective collaborations embed measurement in their process from day one, so that they can tell whether or not the leadership is valued. Going back to the example from the biomedical community, they probably would have made a quicker change in their leadership had they put some sort of assessment process in place that would have given them a heads up that the organizations were checking out of the collaboration long before the money ran out.
I really appreciate that, because we hear about commitment and that feels very theoretical, but you've given us some really easy to access concrete measures around how committed people are. And at the end of the day, it is about dollars, but it's also about action. Our second
but you have
sorry.
I just want to emphasize, you have to create the capacity to measure that stuff. It's easy to track, but if you don't do it, you'll lose track very quickly.
Right, and you never bring it forward to actually look at it and make sense of it, right?
Right.
Without the capacity in place. I really appreciate that too. So our second question comes from Lori Kaut. I hope I said your last name correctly, Lori. Where does Chris feel that local governments or municipalities go wrong in terms of fostering collaboration in their communities, and what role or roles should they play?
Well, I think they have an invaluable role to play, because governments are part of the most of the systems that we're talking about when we're talking about civic issues, whether it's education or safety or justice or public health or whatever it might be. So they clearly have a role to play. I'm not sure they make any different mistake than others, but perhaps they're more prone to what Ronald Heifetz and Martin Litsky have called the most common leadership error, which is to treat an adaptive challenge as if it were a technical problem. And I think that is something government is prone to. They want a technical solution to very complex challenges. And that's what, government programs are too often designed as technical solutions rather than help adaptive challenges. And so, the technical solution to a public health challenge might be to build a health clinic in a neighborhood. The more adaptive approach would be to work with the residents to figure out how do we foster a healthy living and healthy foods and healthy living activity in the neighborhood, so that they don't need many of the services of a health clinic. So it is a different mindset, going from viewing the challenges through an adaptive lens versus a technical lens. And I found with a lot of government officials, they're very trained in, let's put a program together to fix this issue, when they're not. If they were fixable by a program, we would have fixed them a long time ago.
Right. But, it's also that they operate very much on a timeline that is, fairly short when you think about election cycles and the need to deliver results within those election cycles. You can understand, not that it's right, but you can certainly understand the temptation, right?
Yeah, and I showed the collaboration cycle earlier, and one of the most important elements of that collaboration cycle is to know that it takes 3 to 5 years to go through that cycle. So we need a collaborative approach that fits that 3 to 5 year cycle at least. And if you look at the role philanthropy plays with 1-year grants, that doesn't match the collaboration cycle. And as you just pointed out, a 2 or 4 year election term doesn't really fit with the collaboration cycle. So we need to think about those and maybe make it so that our grant cycles, at least, because we have more freedom to change our grant cycles than we do our election cycles, but we need to make sure some of these other cycles in our life match up with the collaboration cycle.
Absolutely. I think that's fabulous. Now we have a question here from Mark Moland, and he says, I'm a new member who has joined a regional collaboration involving health, social services, and education. What are your thoughts about what I should do as a new member? Building trust, meeting one-on-one are certainly things that he's heard you say, and acknowledging that you don't know. Is there anything else that you would really suggest to someone who's newer to, it sounds like, an established regional collaborative?
Yeah. Well, and the description he gave of the collaborative makes my head hurt. I mean, I don't know how you take on all 3 of those issues at once. So one of the questions that I would encourage him to ask the group is, where have we achieved change? So what's different today from when this established collaborative started? And where are we, what area are we working on achieving change in next? Because you can't change everything at once. So you're always focused somewhere, or at least you should be if you're making progress. So understand what change has occurred, because that'll help you with the context of the collaborative environment. But make sure you understand where they're focused next, and if that focus oftentimes it's not as clear as we would like it to be, I think newcomers can help bring more clarity to the collaboration process by asking compelling questions that maybe the others think everybody already knows the answer to, or might be afraid to ask. So I'll go back to that skill of asking the compelling questions, practicing inquiry. That is something that, as a new person, that I would encourage you to ask as many questions that help you, A, understand what's going on better, but then B, encourage others to think differently. Because I'm willing to bet that there's probably opportunity for new thinking within any collaboration.
That's beautiful. So we have one other question, I think, which is probably all we will likely have time for, but it's from Christina Mays-Nino, and she said that while she appreciates the focus on working with high-functioning or high-capacity partners when working collaboratively, it does raise the question for her around how equity gets addressed in this. And so she says many smaller nonprofits addressing complex poverty and racial exclusion have limited capacity because they lack consistent funding, but represent important groups and viewpoints. So how can we ensure that they are equitably involved in collaboration activities when they may not pass that that threshold that you have of high performance potentially?
Yeah, a very good question, and I'm going to cop out with maybe an unrealistic answer, and that is it's incumbent on the funders to fund these important organizations that are serving people, disadvantaged populations, disconnected populations, racial minorities, whatever it may be. The saying, not for me, without me, is critical to any collaboration. We shouldn't work to achieve change that doesn't include the people with lived experience. So we have to find a way to do it. And if that means we cannot collaborate until we help provide the resources and the capacity to, I'll use a concrete example. If we're working on a neighborhood redevelopment collaboration, and you have a handful of very large, well-funded, we know these kinds of community development organizations, but there's not a lot of good grassroots, residents-oriented. I would rather delay the collaboration and spend a couple of years in lifting up and strengthening those neighborhood-based groups so that they can actively participate in collaboration rather than trying to collaborate without them. I think if we collaborate without those with the lived experience, we will end up with a failed collaboration. So I realize it's not always a realistic answer, but I think funders in particular need to take a hard look at the role they play in perpetuating mediocre organizations by not making some hard choices and not pushing for change, but for also funding collaborations that don't have a chance to succeed because of the challenge that that Christina points out, that if you try to do a collaboration that leaves out the people with lived experience because they're not in a position to engage, it will not work. And that to me is on the funders. That's the funders' responsibility.
I think you're right. I also think the leaders of the collaborative as a whole really need to look at and consider the budget of the collaborative and in what ways have they created space in their budget to help subsidize or fund or address that full participation. I also, go ahead.
If we use collaboration poorly, we end up draining valuable resources from organizations. I mean that's the concern I see a lot is, we're going to spend all our money on collaboration, which means I don't have the resources I need to do my activities, because it is, to a certain degree, a zero-sum game, or at least a constrained resource game. And so we shouldn't, again, quoting the president of the fund, Brad Whitehead, collaboration does not overcome mediocrity. It's not a replacement for mediocrity. So if we make people more mediocre by taking funding away from them so that we can put it into collaboration, you're really just compounding mistakes there. I would rather have more high-performing organizations and less collaboration than more collaboration and less high-performing organizations by a long shot.
So what you're reminding us really is it's not an either-or. And often what you're seeing is that collaboration versus high-performance organizations should never be kind of put on that continuum of either-or. It's a both-and.
Yes. Yes, it has to be both. It has to be both and.
Well, Chris, I want to thank you. I can't believe that I'm looking down at my clock and we're almost at the top of the hour. It seems as if the more you've sort of unpacked for us around the collaboration handbook, the more curious I am and to kind of dig in a little bit deeper around some of these ideas and concepts and experiences that you've shared. Now, I trust that when the material comes out, included there will be a link for folks to be able to access the document as a whole itself. And I really appreciate the comments and questions that you folks have all shared. I think that that really is what helps us to create dynamic and thought-provoking webinars, which is our goal. Again, want to thank our supporters, Maytree Foundation, Ontario Trillium Foundation, J.W. McConnell Family Foundation, and the Province of Ontario for making these broadcasts possible. As Megan said at the start of the call, in the next few days, you'll receive an email that includes links to the audio of this webinar and other materials profiled and related to the call. And we welcome your feedback always at Tamarack at tamarackcommunity.ca for any ideas, suggestions, and recommendations. And this session we will also post in the Tamarack Resource Library, so look for it there as well. And just in wrapping up, I want to bring to your attention two upcoming face-to-face learning events that Tamarack's hosting. The first, which Chris has already referenced, is our Collective Impact 3.0 workshop being held May 9th to 11th in Kitchener, Ontario. And also really excited to let you know that this year's Deepening Community Neighborhoods, the Heart of Community Gathering will be held in Montreal, Quebec from June 6th to 8th, and we're stepping out boldly with the help of a number of local partners to have this be as fully bilingual an event as possible. So finally, there's lots of other upcoming webinars and one-day workshops coming to neighborhoods near you, and there on the screen you'll see our website, which is where you need to go to find them. So thank you everyone for an incredible session. Chris, thank you for being so generous with your knowledge and your experience, and look forward to seeing you in Kitchener.
Thank you very much, Sylvia. I look forward to seeing you and hopefully as many folks who are still on the line as possible in Kitchener in May. It should be a great conference, and look forward to learning a lot there.
Yeah, me too. 14 peer presenters. We're going to get a lot of good stuff, I think. So thanks, everyone. Have a super afternoon, and we will talk soon.